Hello and welcome to Honey Badger 3D Print and Paint. Today we are going to go over the 13 things that I wish I knew before I started 3D printing. So before we start that, roll those credits. Okay, so this video is for some of our new starters. So we're in the new year now. A lot of people will have got 3D printers for Christmas. And this is really a video just to sort of get you started on the 13 things that I wish that I knew before I started. I started 3D printing about 6-7 years ago now with my friend Mike, who runs a channel with me. We didn't really have any support network. We didn't really understand how 3D printers worked. And it actually caused me to get rid of my first machine. I bought a FlashForge Creator Pro, which is actually a pretty solid machine. And I got rid of it because I just didn't understand why I couldn't get it working. I was convinced it was the machine. However, now looking back, there's a lot of things I could have done that would have got that machine working with no problems. So, number one, you are going to fail. So this isn't supposed to scare anyone or frighten them off. It's just important to know that when you're doing this hobby, at some point, maybe early on, maybe a little bit down the line, your prints are going to fail. And that's okay. Okay? As long as you learn from it, and as long as you change your settings or you adjust things, you don't just try printing the same thing over and over again without changing anything, then failure is absolutely fine. We learn from failure. But it is important to learn from it. It's important not to immediately go, well, this machine is broken, and that's it, and just throw it in the bin or sell it. It's important to know that you probably are going to fail at some point, and it's completely fine that you're going to do so. 2, if your machine cost £150, it's not a £3,000 machine that you got for cheaper. Okay, this machine here is a Sidewinder X1. It costs about £320 brand new, although I appreciate they are more at the moment on Banggood and Alibaba and places like that. But that's how much I paid for mine. You have to manage your expectations. If you buy an Ender 3, it is not a cut down Ultimaker. Yeah, it is not it's as good as a Prusa. You absolutely can print as well on this as you can on next to any machine. The difference is that this machine needs fiddling with, it needs calibrating, it needs setting up. The slicer settings have to be correct. We'll get to those in a minute. And you have to perform regular maintenance on it. If you were to buy a Raise 3D Pro or an Ultimaker or something like that, you would potentially get to a point where you would get out of the box printing, where there's very little calibration set up, you just get the machine out and off you go. But you are paying for an enclosed ecosystem, and as a result, you are getting you're getting a lot of help from a lot of very talented engineers. When you buy a machine like this, there is an assumption that you are going to, that you're going to work with it. And there is an assumption that you understand how to do that. Unfortunately, for most people, that isn't the case, especially new people to the hobby. But you can print just as well on an Ender 3 as you can on an Ultimaker. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying that there are more steps in the process to get to that final print than there are with just getting an Ultimaker out of the box. 3. Facebook groups are your friends, even if they don't seem so to begin with. So I think we can all agree that Facebook is a difficult platform to like for a whole host of reasons. There is a reality that when you buy a printer, if you go onto those printer groups and you ask what is classed as a newbie question, you will more than likely get some sarcastic comments. You will get some people who are very unhelpful, you'll get some people who are very ill-informed, and you'll get some people who are rude. But you will also find a whole host of people who have genuine experience and are willing to help you. As a community, the 3D printing community does generally do pretty well at coming together. I would cite the fact that the sheer amount of PPE that was printed during the COVID crisis does somewhat absolve some of the sarcastic comments you get when you ask about how you level your bed, or or whatever, or ask what's the cheapest but best printer for the billionth time on the groups. Use the search function, but whatever way you've broken your machine or whatever issue you're having, it's very likely somebody else on that group has already had that issue and has already solved, and someone on the group has already solved it, or they've solved it themselves. Use the search function in the groups before you start posting, but absolutely the groups are your best friends when it comes to this sort of stuff. 4. This is not a plug and play hobby. These machines are not the same as inkjet printers. You do not simply plug it in and off you go. It is a process, and more specifically, it is a hobby. If you are under the impression that you are going to go out and buy 4 Ender 3s, set up an Etsy shop, and be printing at a quality that you can sell inside of the first day, I'm very sorry, but you probably aren't. They require setup, they require calibration, they require constant maintenance, and they require you to not smash them every single time they do something wrong, which I would challenge is the hardest part of this hobby. But it is important to remember that these are machines that are really very accurate for the price that you get them for. And it's important to remember that it is a process. Getting your slicer settings right, making sure that your X carriage is nice and tight, your bed's nice and tight, that everything's clean, that everything's oiled, that nothing's sticking. It all requires setup, and it does require a bit of patience. 5. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, and most of them are pretty crappy. So, this probably harks back to the Facebook group one. There's a reality that when you post on the groups, there probably is a number of people who are misinformed, or don't have the answer but want to chime in anyway, or just want to say something generally unhelpful. A classic example of this is that it's a running joke on the groups that as soon as anyone has an issue, you pretty much just tell them to re-level their bed. Everybody says it all the time. It was funny the first, 9 times that someone did it. It stopped being funny like 2 years ago, but people still do it. It's important to remember that just because somebody tells you that that's an issue they had with their machine, this is how they fixed it, unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the way it fixes yours. They could have different firmware, different drivers, different E-steps, so on and so forth. It's a bit like one of the things that a lot of people suggest that you do, I also recommend it, is that you calibrate your E-steps. Calibrating your E-steps is a process by which you tell the machine to extrude 100 millimeters, and then basically you measure how much has been extruded, and then you can change how many rotations your E-motor makes to push out that amount of filament. If you're under or above, then you can change your E-steps accordingly. You could have 5 machines all next to each other, all identical, that all require slightly different E-steps. It's really annoying. But people will still ask on the group, what are your E-steps? So I can set my machine to that. Doesn't work. It's like glasses prescriptions. Just because it works for them, it does not mean it's going to work for you. But some people on the groups are genuinely really helpful. And unfortunately, it is down to you to sort of sort the wheat from the chaff and figure out what it is you need to do. 6. You can make money off of 3D printing if you find your niche. So, there's really not a lot of people who are making money out of 3D printing by printing comic book figures and things like that. It's a lot of materials. You don't have the intellectual property rights. You can make all the arguments that you want. You don't have the IP to sell Marvel's intellectual property or Disney's intellectual property or whatever. You can call it fan art, you can do what you like. They are loopholes to litigation. You don't have the right to sell something you didn't create. There's two real ways that you can make half decent money out of 3D printing. One is by doing your own 3D modeling. So offering a service whereby you create in CAD or you create in ZBrush or whatever models for other people. You sell the STL files. You can make money that way. The other is by finding your niche. So it is by producing normally smaller parts, but things that somebody needs that at the moment it's just not being fulfilled. So for example, I've got a friend who prints rifle stocks. He prints attachments for air rifles that allows people to quick change out their stocks and turn their full-size rifles into TDRs, things like that. I've got another friend who likes to print gamer tags for people, and he does them in a specific game style or whatever. It's niche, but they make money out of it, and it's worthwhile. You absolutely can. Can you buy a printer and 2 or 3 days later make money out of it? I mean, in theory, technically, yeah, you can. Will you? No, probably not. So most people I know have an Etsy store, and that's where they sell their stuff. And yeah, you can absolutely make money out of 3D printing. Absolutely. Does everybody make money out of 3D printing? No, not at all. 7. Slicer settings can be more important than mechanics. Let me clarify that. So, if your X carriage is moving all over the place, your bed's moving all over the place, your Z-axis or whatever is off, your slicer can't fix that. You need to make sure that your machine is built as sturdily and as square as possible. However, things like, if you haven't gone through and calibrated your E-steps, you can deal with that in slicer settings. If you don't want to go in and fiddle about with linear advance, you can fix that in slicer settings. If your part cooling isn't great, there are things you can do in slicer settings to help with that as well. Slicer settings are absolutely key to getting good prints out of your machines. And as before with C number 5 for opinions are like arseholes, not everybody's settings are going to work for your machine. I have 2 Sidewinder X1s. My profiles for each are materially different. They are fundamentally the same. The bed size is the same, all the dimensions are the same, the speeds are pretty much the same, part cooling is pretty much the same. But my extrusion multipliers, my Z offsets, my offset from part for my support settings and things like that, they are functionally different, and it matters. If your settings are not right, you will get trash prints, and there's nothing you can do about that. You can't just mechanically tune your machine and make up for bad slicer settings. 8. Not all slicers are the same. So, as I've probably talked about on the channel before, we use Simplify 3D. It is a paid-for slicer, and it is objectively awful. They haven't updated it in years. They've broken a number of promises. It is devoid of a number of features that are available in Cura, Idea Maker, Prusa Slicer. And you're asking the question, why do I still use it? And the question is, because I paid for it. I paid for it. I gave them my hard-earned English pesos, and they gave me back a piece of software that hasn't received an update in pretty much 2 years. It is annoying, but I am not going to not use it. It was an expensive piece of software for me, and it's incredibly frustrating that they haven't updated the software. That being said, I know my way around the slicer. All of my machines are set up on it at this point. I've got consistently good results with the slicer at this point. So there's features that I would love to have, paint on supports. I would love to have the ability to snap a face to the bed, which you can do in Prusa Slicer, and I'm pretty sure you can do in Cura as well. I want tree supports pretty badly. I'd like some different infills. There's a whole laundry list of stuff that I'd like that's apparently coming in Mythical version 5, which I'm assuming they'll release version 5 just after the day that Ragnarok occurs, I assume, just to really annoy people. There are free slicers, Repetier Host, Slicer, there's Cura, Prusa Slicer, there's Idea Maker, there's loads. Flashforge have their own slicer. They have one called Flashprint, and it's pretty poor. But not all slicers are the same. Not all settings in all slicers are in the same place or called the same things. Once you find a slicer that works for you, it's going to be pretty hard to wrestle you away from it. Ergo, why I'm still using Simplify 3D. 9, materials matter. So, with most people's printers, they'll get a small spool of PLA filament. PLA is the most common filament. It is easy to print with, relatively speaking. It's got pretty good adhesion, pretty low warp, but it's not UV resistant. You can't have it outside. It's not particularly strong. And you know, if you're building mechanical parts or you want clear parts or something like that, you know, PLA is not the thing. PETG is what people tend to sort of, I suppose, graduate to after they've finally tuned their PLA profile. And then they tend to try ABS and ASA and things like that. TPU is also a favourite one, which is a flexible rubber filament. It doesn't really matter what you want to print with, you're going to have to tune your slicer for each different material. So TPU has to print slower, ABS and PETG both print hotter, PETG can't have a part cooling fan, so on and so forth. If you just Google your material and the slicer settings, you'll see the areas in which they're different. Most spools come with the bed temperature and the hot end temperature as well that they should print at, and they normally give you a range of sort of between 60 and 80 on the bed, or between 190 and 210 on the hot end, things like that. It's important to note that they don't just print differently, they are mechanically and chemically different. So some are UV reactive, some aren't, some can be left outside, some can't, some are reactive to moisture, some aren't, so on and so forth. So just do your research on your materials and make sure you're selecting the right material for the right job. 10. 10 is level the bed. Now, as I said earlier, this is a running joke on most of the Facebook pages. I would say that 30 to 40% of most people's problems come from leveling their bed, and leveling their bed incorrectly. I level my bed the way that works for me. You should level the bed the way that works for you. The way I do it is I home my machine, I turn it off, I unplug it, I then push my extruder to each corner, and I level the bed so that it almost touches my my nozzle. Then I will print something that prints all the way, like my entire bed volume, but is only doing one layer, and then I will live adjust my bed as it prints. I've found it's pretty much the only way that you can get the right amount of squeeze and get the results that you want relatively quickly. There's people who will tell you to go for an ABL, an auto bed leveling device. You can absolutely do that. I haven't. I've got an auto bed leveler on my Prusa, and the only reason that I have it on that is because the machine comes with it. I have no need for it on my Sidewinders or my Longer or my Elf. Perfectly capable of leveling the bed. But it is a large portion of people's issues. their bed isn't level, so they get poor adhesion. Their bed isn't level, so their print knocks off, or their supports fail, or whatever. Level your bed, guys. 11, set up your machine before you modify it. This is something I wish I could have tattooed on my head. So many times I see people saying on the groups, I've got X printer on the way, what mods do you recommend? They haven't even, it's not even on their doorstep yet, and they want to know what modifications they should be doing. And the answer is none. Every machine that you buy should work out of the box. And if you start modifying it before you've even set it up and done some calibration prints, then one, you're more than likely going to invalidate your warranty, and you then can't send the printer back if something is mechanically or electronically wrong. And two, you're never going to know if what you've done is actually an upgrade because you don't have a baseline. You don't know what it looks like without changing the part cooling fan or adding a bed leveling sensor or, or putting, bracing bars on or whatever. Not every machine needs to be modified. Most of them will print perfectly fine without them. You'll notice that on mine, on this Sidewinder, I've got these bracing bars. They make no difference. They were a £40 kit that I should not have bought. On my other Sidewinder, I don't have them, and it prints better than this one. Why? Because God hates me, and I don't know why. I honestly couldn't tell you why that this one doesn't print as well as my other Sidewinder. It is the reason why this Sidewinder is in here for the video, and the other Sidewinder is out there printing at the moment, because this is a machine that I do use, and it prints fine. It does fine for my bed, for my bases, for my prints, and I tend to use it for that. But I pretty much only use it for that, because everything else I tend to put on my Longers or my other Sidewinder or my Elf or whatever. Modifying your printer does not de facto make it better. Set it up first, get your baseline, understand where you're starting from, and then you can make upgrades. Changing part cooling fans, going for an all metal heat break, whatever you want to do. 12. Support material sucks, but tough luck. So support material is, you will have a model that has areas that essentially have the printer trying to print in midair. So if we were taking, for example, a standing model, between the legs there would be a crotch. You go up to the crotch and there's a small bridge that goes across. More than likely you're going to need to add supports to that. But the same goes as if that character is holding an axe out and the axe starts lower than the hand and the arm and everything else. You'll need support material. You can absolutely tune support material. You can tune interface layers, you can tune separation distance, but the likelihood is you're going to get some sort of support scarring. Now, if you have dual extrusion or an IDEX or something like that, then you could print with a soluble support, something like PVA, where you just dump the model in water and the PVA supports dissolve. But the reality is when you print with supports, you're going to damage the surface of your model. You are talking about melting plastic directly in front of plastic that you have just melted. It's annoying. Nobody likes supports, but unless you buy like a £15,000 SLS machine, tough. You need supports. They're there to support you. 13. Not all beds are created equal. Sidewinder bed. Sidewinder bed is what is known as ultra base. It is a glass bed that has a fine mesh over the top. What happens when the bed cools down is that the glass contracts, but the mesh doesn't, and your print, theoretically, just pops right off. The problem with this is that this is more warped than the Enterprise. This bed is not level. Now, there are other options. You can go for spring steel beds, and you can also get these types of beds which are magnetic ones. So you can pull those off and then you go like that and your print pops off. There's also mirrors which are perfectly flat. Borsorolite glass, which is generally flat. And some people just print on bare aluminium, and those people are mental. So what you shouldn't be doing is you shouldn't have to add loads of glue stick. You should never have to use painter's tape. Okay, there's a blue painter's tape that you'll see some people using, or you'll see an orange tape called Kapton tape. It's a high temperature adhesive tape. You should not have to use those to get good adhesion on your bed. If your bed doesn't let things stick to it, then you should change the print surface. PEI is very popular. It's actually what this magnetic bed is made out of. There's a plastic coating on a lot of the spring steels and things like that. Fullerman sell a lot of modified beds and things like that. And you can buy the ultra bases as well. Not all of them are warped. This one is, my other one isn't. Again, probably another reason why this one doesn't print as well as the other machine does. It's important to note that I use hairspray on mine, on all of my beds. I do not use that as an adhesive. I use it as a releasing agent. So for example, if you were printing PETG, PETG will basically chemically bond to glass. So you need to have something in between the PETG and the glass, hairspray, so that when you release and try to take off the PETG print, it will actually come off and not rip a hole in your glass. So, they're my 13 things that I do genuinely wish that I knew before I started printing. If there's one final thing, it's just remember that you're not the only person who's broken your printer at all. In fact, you've probably not even broken it in a brand new and unique way. There'll be a lot of people who have done exactly the same stuff that you have. They've damaged their beds, they've cracked their glass, they've broken their touch screens, they've bent their hot ends and whatever. Everything is repairable. There are very, very few times where a printer will so catastrophically fail that the machine is completely useless after the fact. I should know, I've broken a lot of machines, broken so many. But we'll also do a video very soon on slicer settings and things you should definitely be looking at. So definitely keep an eye out for that video. Thanks very much for joining us, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to tick that bell as well so you get a notification every time one of our videos releases. Thanks very much. See you guys soon.